The mold remediating IV drip. It's brilliant.
It is. It really is. Have you ever read a question like this and just knew that you could be friends with the person that wrote it?
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. Today I'm joined by producer Andres Semeniego and our special guest, carpenter Caleb Carpenter. Please email our questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Hey guys, it's good to see you this morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Patrick.
Caleb, it's been a pleasure talking to you already, and thank you so much for doing this. It's a pleasure to have you on our program.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I've always enjoyed listening to the podcast and happy to talk whenever I can.
For starters, I want to mention the passing of the Taunton Press founder, Paul Roman. We want to thank the Roman family for their very important contribution to the home building industry, fine home building, fine woodworking, fine gardening, and threads. And we want to wish them the best in this time of need with their family. So thank you all, and wishing the best for the Romans. Caleb, it's a pleasure to have you here. So for folks who have not met you, we should say that there is a Fine Home Building Pro Talk podcast where we talk to you at length. But can you give us the brief introduction to what you do for a living?
Yeah. So, the goal when we went into business was to specialize in trim carpentry, cabinet installation, and eventually branch out into a full-on cabinet shop. But in the meantime, while we're still getting going, we're in our second year of business. So in the meantime, we're doing small remodels, kitchens, baths. Currently, we're on a good-sized basement remodel. So a little bit of everything.
And this is a long history in your family of being carpenters. Can you briefly talk about that?
Yeah, it really is. I guess to sum it up quickly, years back in high school, I did a lineage family tree project with Ancestry.com, and we found as far back as we could find that there were carpenters in every generation, going back at least 4 generations on both sides. So that was pretty cool. And obviously, with the last name Carpenter, it kind of is easy to go into that trade. But both my grandfathers were involved in the trades. My dad, my brother, my sisters have a painting business. My uncles have construction businesses. It's a big family ordeal.
And, I've met a lot of people who do trade work. You seem to really enjoy it. Is that a fair statement?
Oh yeah. I absolutely love it. It's, obviously it's my job. It's my career. I build furniture on the weekends for hobbies. My wife and I do some volunteer work, and that's construction based. Like every aspect of our life is, or my life is centered around construction and building.
Well, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. We should mention, I think we were introduced because you wrote in a question to the Fine Home Building podcast regarding your recent home purchase. It's not that recent now, but can you talk a little bit about your house? And we're going to talk more about it in the after show. So can you get us started on what it's like and what you've been doing?
Yeah, so it, growing up, my dad was always working on old houses, and from a young age, I decided that I wanted an old house. I absolutely love just the idea of it, the romance of it. So this is not that. This is not the dream house by any means. It's a modular single-story ranch. It was, I don't think you can say it was built in 2010. It was dropped off a truck in 2010, so it's fairly new. But really, it's the perfect starter home. It has no problems. Like, everything works perfectly. It's well insulated. Utility bills are low. It was the right price. It has a small shop that I can use as a garage. and it's really the perfect starter home. And whether in the future we build somewhere else or we rent this out, sell it, whatever it is, it's a good rentable, sellable, marketable home. And for now, it works great. We like it. We're really enjoying it.
Well, if you just said one thing that sums up your lifestyle, I can't imagine anything better than it's a shop that I can use as a garage, which
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Everyone comes over and asks us like, "Oh, is Maddie? Maddie's my wife. Is Maddie gonna park in the garage?" And we both kind of laugh, like, "No, that was never gonna happen."
you mentioned that you're doing a basement remodel. Is that typical of the work you're doing presently?
Um, Not really. I've done a couple small basement remodels. This one's a little bit bigger. It's actually a previous customer of mine. I've done a bunch of things for them, and last year their fill line for their refrigerator upstairs blew while they were away in Florida. So for 2 months, the house just filled with water. And finally, the city called them and said, "Why is your water bill like $2,000 this month?" And they're like, "Well, we don't know." So that's kind of what started this. And they contacted me once they went through their insurance company. And we've been fighting back and forth with the insurance company for a year now to get them funds. And so finally, about a month ago, we started. So it's a full gut, and it's going to be nice for them because it was pretty dated, and the insurance company has paid for everything to be replaced. So we're going back to studs and doing things right, and it's going to be a nice space for them.
So was the house unoccupied when all this water was running? How did they not notice their basement was filling with the water from the refrigerator's supply line?
Yeah, maybe I forgot to say that, but they were in Florida in their vacation home. They have a home in Florida, so they had no idea that it was happening until finally the city called them, the water department, and told them that something must be wrong because their water bill is, you know, 20, 30 times what it's supposed to be. So
Boy, that's a good argument for having one of these leak detector systems. Am I right? Oh my gosh. So I
yeah,
think Brian Pontalillo was working on that feature for Fine Homebuilding. At least he's been trying to find someone who could write that. But yeah, boy, what a mess.
yeah, that's going to be part of the reconstruction is installing one of those. We're still doing some research on which one to go with. Um,
Maybe you
but
should write
yeah,
this feature.
yeah, maybe I'll work with my plumber on it. I won't be the one installing it, but from what the research I've done, they seem fairly intuitive and simple. It's not a real complicated process.
Especially with the prevalence of home networking, right? It used to be a complicated thing that had to be super analog, but I'm guessing it's gotten easier now with, ways to alert you what's going on.
Yeah, everything is just Wi-Fi. It's simple.
Well, as always, we heard from our fantastic listeners, and I want to thank you all for writing into the podcast email box. This first one comes from our friend Doug in Colorado. Hi, Patrick and team. I was shocked and saddened to learn that Jeff is no longer with FHB. I had heard about the sale and was afraid that familiar faces would be going away. I really enjoyed Jeff's contributions because, like me, he was not a building professional, but a DIYer who had absorbed a lot of building knowledge over the years. I remember an early episode when Jeff was just a voice you heard occasionally. There was a discussion of how to stop knots in pine from bleeding through paint. Jeff said to use a coat of shellac, and Justin asked how he knew that. Jeff simply replied, "What other podcast do I record?" You can learn a lot by observation. When COVID forced the format change, I saw that Jeff's was closer to my age. Now Mike is the only one whose beard color matches mine. I wish Jeff well for the future and will miss him. And I agree with both of those. Doug, thanks for writing in. This comes from Tom. Hello, FHB podcast. I'm just now listening to episode 607, in which you discuss a listener's comment encouraging you to have an article about lifting a heavy ridge beam. And Patrick mentioned his fascination with the problem solving involved in moving heavy things into position during construction. There's a delightful and short illustrated book that might interest you, Moving Heavy Things by Jan Adkins. Adkins has written and illustrated several short, delightful books, many of which look like they're aimed at children, but like moving heavy things are suitable for adults as well. His passion is for wooden boats, a topic about which I know nothing, but his books all exude a respect for craftsmanship and practical knowledge. The closest comparison I can think of is David Macaulay. I'm also a fan of his book, Tying It Up, Tying It Down. Are you familiar with this book, Caleb? Andres, Moving Heavy Things? Had you seen
I
it? No, I
haven't seen
hadn't
it
either.
though.
Yeah. Looks
Never
cool,
seen
right?
it. It looks awesome. In fact, I love the cover illustration. It's great.
Yeah, it's got an engine hanging from a tripod, which is like, that's what I want to do.
You know, I'm tempted to read the book, but I'm almost more tempted to take that illustration to a print shop and have it printed up for my shop. It's just awesome.
It is awesome, yeah. I would say Jan is an amazing illustrator that's got a, kind of old timey but very realistic look. It's super cool. And I'm a fan
Definitely.
of David Macaulay too, who's written some and illustrated some amazing books on all kinds of subjects, from cathedrals and castles and all kinds of amazing, interesting subjects.
Yeah, I've read a couple of his.
Fun stuff for looking at with kids, and I can't help but think that's a good way to introduce them to buildings and how they are put together. Low stakes, but boy, when you see how things are assembled, if you have the right mindset and brain, boy, it can really spark an interest for later life. Did your family look at books like this with you, Caleb?
Yeah, we had a bunch of books along those lines, older books about homes and building and construction and the trades and stuff like that, but from a younger point of view. I don't even know, kind of like this book, I'm not sure if they were actually written for kids or just simpler writing that worked for kids. But they definitely did the job. They got us interested from a young age.
How about you, Andres?
No, no. Most of my family were, part of the construction, but it was mostly here. Back in Ecuador, where I'm from, they were all part of different trades and stuff.
Did you see this stuff growing up? Did you watch tradespeople do their work
No,
nearby?
no. Most of my interest came
Yeah,
from Discovery Channel, actually, looking at modern marvels and stuff like that. Yeah.
interesting.
I,
This
I
comes
thought
from
the
our.
topic, sorry, I thought the
Yeah.
topic of the book was great though, because that especially I work alone. There's a lot of times that we get into situations where we have to lift something heavy. We have to do something awkward, and it made me kind of scanning that over. It made me think of a time that my wife and I were tearing apart a terrible job. We were tearing apart this huge concrete landing, and we had to get this chunk of concrete that weighed probably 600 to 800 pounds into our dump trailer. And through the use of two by fours as levers and, angling the dump trailer down and having her tip it up while I drove backwards and all these different tricks and things, we finally got it in, just the two of us. But there are a lot of times that we run into that where you have to try and safely lift a super, super heavy object, either alone or with one other person. And so something like that could be a great resource for us as, tradesmen working on our own or even with a small crew to learn how to do that safely.
Yeah, it's true. And the reviews I was reading on the bookseller's website for the book indicated that it was folks who had found the information useful at a later time. They didn't even go into learning or trying to learn how to move something heavy. It was something they could do when the situation arose, like you're talking about. I can tell you, I am going to order a copy of that, Tom, and I'll let you know what I think. It looks amazing.
Oh,
This
that'd be
comes from
awesome.
Dale. Hello, FHB crew. I recognize the show is the Fine Homebuilding podcast and not the Fine Commercial Building podcast, but I've listened to every podcast from the beginning and don't recall any mention of the building technique shown in these photos. This is a building being put up for a school in Colorado. The exterior walls have steel studs. I don't know the wall thickness. Pink shaded plywood. was attached to the studs. I'm guessing the plywood was pink from the chemical treatment to prevent rotting. I think it's actually a fire retardant. I was not able to observe the construction from the time the plywood was put in place to when the black coating was applied, but from the photos, it appears to be some sort of tape was applied over the joints before the black coating was applied. The next photo shows workmen attaching vertical wood or engineered wood strips with screws. Out of curiosity, what is this process? And is it ever applied to residential construction? Spraying on some sort of sealer over plywood would seem faster and easier than attaching house wrap. I think I know what this is, but I'm going to let you guys weigh in. Do you know, Caleb, what this process is?
Well, I think did you add the link to Tremco?
Oh, did I? I don't know if
Yeah,
I meant to do that. Yeah.
I
Go ahead.
I I think you did. So, I mean, obviously you found it, but I kind of cheated and looked up Tremco products as well. It seems like it is Tremco fluid applied uh, over top of OSB from the pictures, right?
Yeah, it's a fluid applied WRB, and I actually did a feature article on a residential project using the Tremco product, and it's distinctive in its black color. I'm guessing this is the commercial version, but the one I did was the residential one, and I'll put a Fine Homebuilding link on the podcast page, so if y'all are curious what that's about. But in short, it's a coating that replaces house wrap or some other WRB. Have you ever used this, Caleb?
I haven't. I did a bunch of reading on Tremco's website. It seems interesting. And then there was also that article on GBA. I think it was sorting through the liquid applied weather barriers. That was a good resource to kind of learn a little bit about it because I've never done it. I've been curious about it, but I've never found an application that I would use this over zip system yet. And that's kind of what I would be curious to know is
Why
why
would
to
you,
use
right?
this
Yeah.
instead of zip. Yeah.
I don't think you would, but it seems like a pretty good solution for, commodity plywood and OSB. It's continuous. Have you seen
Yeah.
this,
Oh, I
Andres?
haven't. This is the first time I'm looking at it.
It's available from a couple manufacturers. Obviously, Tremco isn't the only one, but yeah, it seems like a great idea. Although it is more expensive than house wrap, as you might imagine. So I think that is why you might not have seen it previously.
And what I was trying to figure out is it seems like it would be more expensive for OSB and the fluid applied than it is for zip. Or am I wrong there?
I don't know, but that would be a good question to ask. You know, in my limited understanding of both processes, it seems like the only difference is they're applying the coating at the zip factory instead of on the job site, right? It's just part of the assembly line instead of bringing a spray rig out to the job site.
Right. Yeah, and what I saw on Tremco's website is that um, there's a couple under their application instructions. It seems like there are a unbelievable amount of system component options, which for somebody that has a hard time organizing things at times, I feel like I would struggle to deal with. I mean, there's got to be 25 or 30 different options for sealants, for fabrics, for tapes, and things like that. Whereas on Zip's website, they basically have the panels,
And
two
tape.
different types of tape.
I'm
And
guessing that
so,
the Tremco folks are trying to answer a need for a bunch of different sheathing types. Like I'm
yeah,
guessing in the commercial sector, they have to deal with gypsum and other stuff that we see less in the residential world. And I'm guessing
which makes sense.
cost
Yeah.
is a huge factor in the commercial and industrial sectors where they're selling most of this stuff. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
maybe we need a spray applied WRB rep to be on the show and answer some of these questions.
That would be nice. There's that article on GBA house wrap in a can liquid applied WRBs that Martin Holliday wrote. That was really really good, and I was curious if he would ever do an article on liquid applied versus like a zip system and the pros and cons and why pick one versus the other. Because to me, if I'm building a house or doing an addition, I would have to be pretty well convinced as to why to go liquid applied versus zip, because zip is so simple. You can get it locally, and it's just easy. So I would love to see the pros and cons.
Me too. And if any of our listeners have experience with using the two systems, I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you chose one or the other, or have used both in the respective situations. It's a good question. Let's see. This comes from Theo. Hi, y'all. Love the show. I'm working on a remodel of my early 70s single story house near Seattle, and I have an insulation decision that I'd like to get your input on. Okay, it's really a water, air, vapor barrier, and insulation decision. We're working on an interior remodel down to the studs. The original wall structure was horizontally applied cedar channel lap siding, felt paper, 2x4 studs, fiberglass bats faced with metallic paper on the interior, painted drywall. There's no sheathing or air sealing, and there's a beefy natural gas furnace to keep the place warm. The drywall and the severely wind-washed fiberglass are out there. So the question is out of there. So the question is what to replace the insulation with. I don't want to remove the exterior siding, so I'm considering two options. Number one is 3.5 inches of rock wool bats, filling the stud bays and thus pressed up against the tar paper / siding. There are some places where the tar paper is ripped, so I'd patch those as much as possible with some perforated house wrap or Tyvek before installing the bats. The other option is 3 inches of XPS foam cut and cobbled with can foam around the edges and gaps. Place it towards the inside of the bays and allow a 1/2 inch gap between the XPS and the tar paper / siding. I could optionally remove the tar paper mostly from the interior of the siding, but I figure this isn't super necessary since it's quite vapor permeable. I figure the nominal R value of these two is about the same, which is R15, but the XPS offers a nice rain screen between the siding and insulation and also offers some air sealing benefit. Otherwise, my drywall has to be the only air seal. On the downside, it's a pain to install and is totally vapor closed. Which of these sounds best, or is there another option I should be considering? Should I remove the felt paper? I recognize that these questions are partly / mostly answered in Andy Engel's article Managing Water When Insulating Old Walls from 2021, but I just want to make sure nothing has changed in the last couple of years and that I do it right. Some additional details. The bulk of the area that I'm working on is on the gable end of the house and faces south, so that it takes a decent amount of weather. The roof is 412 and there are 18-inch gable end overhangs. Most of this area will also be getting 1/2 inch plywood sheathing on the interior to give the wall some shear strength, but I assume that doesn't affect things much. Thanks, Theo. Well, Theo, thanks for writing in. Caleb, do you want to weigh in on this?
I thought it was a great question. I think I love rock wool, but I don't love the idea of pushing it right up against that siding because, as we know, siding leaks, and rock wool obviously can deal with moisture, but I still don't love the idea of pushing it right up against the siding. I think I think he quoted the article "Managing Water When Insulating Old Walls" by Andy Engel, and that had a really nice option of the 1/2 inch air gap with um, a piece of rigid insulation on top of that, and then mineral wool on top of that. And I think in Andy's article, he's probably dealing with a 2x6 wall, whereas
Theo.
the quest Theo, right? Theo is dealing with a 2x4 wall, so that makes it a little bit more difficult.
One of the other ways we've suggested dealing with this is a layer of 30-pound felt paper fold into kind of a U-shaped arrangement with like stapling flaps on the edges, about an inch wide. And that kind of acts as the air barrier and allows some drying if water does get in there because it's vapor permeable and can actually dry more readily once it gets wet. So I think that's a good idea, and that becomes your partial air seal in addition to the drywall layer. Caleb, what do you think about skipping the polyiso, which doesn't allow any drying, but it is a better air seal perhaps?
Yeah, I mean it's an old house. We're not going to get, a perfect air seal. I like the idea of the 30-pound felt. It's like a perfect building science creation that was created before they knew what building science was. I like that idea. I didn't think about doing the little U fold. I do remember that article now. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then would you do rock wool inside of that?
Yeah, because as you suggest, it's really moisture tolerant. I think fiberglass could work too. I don't think I would fill it with cellulose because if that gets wet,
Yeah.
it's going to be hard to dry. And detail your exterior as best you can with, cap flashings over doors and windows. And you asked if you should rip out the felt paper. I think you should totally leave that alone. It is helping your
Yeah.
assembly shed water at a minimum. So, that's important. I'm glad we don't build houses without sheathing anymore. I think that's a structural sacrifice. What do you think about that, Caleb? Would you go so far as to add a sheathing layer on the interior to boost the strength of this assembly?
I think I would be closer to tearing off the siding than adding a sheathing layer on the inside. Unless the siding is just absolutely beautiful and it would be a sin to take it down. I think I would be closer to doing that than to adding a sheathing layer on the inside. It just seems like more work than re-siding the house. What do you think?
I think you're totally right, man. I don't think I would put the sheathing layer on the interior, like you said. Put it on the outside if you need to, but if you want to increase the racking resistance of this house, there are ways to do that with lead-in bracing or probably solid blocking would help quite a bit. The T-style wind bracing from Simpson might be a good option if you have room. It seems like unnecessary expense, and for what end? It's going to complicate everything. Extension jams on doors and windows. You're going to have to move all the receptacles out. Yeah.
For sure.
I'm curious what our listeners will say. If y'all have thoughts on how Theo should work on this, I would love to hear. This one comes from Peter. Hello, FHB podcast. I was quite surprised to see a very familiar ICF Foundation photo pop up in my YouTube feed last Friday. I want to say also that Matt from Timber HP was a great guest host. So Peter sent in a photo of his Google Street View photo of his ICF Foundation, which I thought was pretty hilarious. So apparently the Google car had driven down his street and captured his house under construction. He says, apologies if you've already discussed this question a gazillion times, but I'm trying to figure out whether the silver or white facer should face in or out on my assembly. I've attached a section drawing. The only change with the section is that there is 2 inches of exterior rigid foam split into 2 layers, a 1.5 inch reclaimed fiber-faced polyiso, which was a harrowing drive indeed. I've attached a photo, plus a half an inch of foil-faced polyiso seams staggered and taped, of course. Also described below from inside to out. The house is in Boston, Massachusetts area, climate zone 5. So what do you all think? Shiny, silver facer facing the exterior or the interior? And I'll put Peter's assembly drawing in the podcast page so you all can check it out. But from inside to out, we have 1/2 inch gypsum, dense packed cellulose, 7/16 inch zip sheathing, 1.5 inch fiber faced polyiso, a 1/2 inch of polyiso, 3/4 inch strapping, a ventilated rain screen, and then lap siding. So, foil in or out? Caleb, you have thoughts on this?
Foil in or out? So the picture I couldn't get to come up for this one, but I'm trying to imagine the assembly that was described. But my thoughts were foil in, but I could be
To
wrong.
stop vapor.
Yeah.
I don't think there's an answer to this.
I,
Because if you live in a mixed climate, you want to prevent moisture migration in both seasons. So I think I would put it on the exterior and treat it like a WRB.
Yeah.
Primarily because that's what I've seen people doing who have foil-faced polyiso on their exterior walls. Yeah, I don't know. This is stumped the podcast. Andres, you got thoughts on
Yeah,
this?
I
What
think
would you
I would
do?
put it outside as well. I think I seen some type of detail from Steve Basic doing it outside. I don't recall, but I think it's a good idea, especially in climate 5.
Well, there you go. If Steve Basic says it's all
Yeah.
right, that's got to be pretty good.
I think that's the answer then. Yeah.
Have you ever used reclaimed insulation, Caleb, in any of your projects?
I haven't. I've been looking for an opportunity to use it, especially after seeing his picture. That just looks fun. I
Do you want to
and
describe
it's
Peter's photo? Because it's pretty good.
well, it looks like a Toyota Tacoma loaded up with hundreds of sheets of foam. It's kind of unbelievable. Uh, yeah, I don't know if he said how far he had to drive, but that had to have been interesting, especially if he had to get on any highways or major roads.
He described it as harrowing, which it seems like the right word. It's literally dozens of sheets in the bed, and then he's towing a utility trailer with looks like dozens more. Yeah, a fantastic. What a great use of what is otherwise garbage, though. That's all I can say about that.
And it's awesome. He probably paid $150 for that load. Like it is unbelievably cheap. It really is. You've used it before, right?
Yeah, I used it to insulate the building I'm sitting in. I bought a bunch of it from insulationdepot.com, and they send it on a common carrier. Be prepared to unload it yourself would be my only caution, but it arrived when they said it was. It was twice as much as they told me they were going to send. My guess is it's because, some sheets are broken and damaged, and,
Yeah.
rather than people be mad about that, they just send enough to cover the quantity they've promised in undamaged sheets, and they send you a bunch extra, which is cool. It was enough to insulate the walls and roof of this building, which is amazing. And it was, I want to say it was like $1,200 or $1,300 for all of that inch and a
The
half
whole load.
insulation. Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah, I wish I had a spot to store a load of it and then I could just pick away at it on different projects, but it's hard to go get just a few pieces. It doesn't really make sense, when you only need a sheet or two.
Exactly. And my experience is they won't even sell small quantities. It's meant to deal with, commercial and industrial roofing salvage, right? This is stuff that they pulled off of commercial and industrial buildings to re-roof or add insulation. And yeah, they just want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
So we're saying foam on the outside. Is that a we're gonna stick with that plan?
I like it.
All right. If you all have opinions out there listening, what you think Theo should do with his reclaimed insulation, I'd be pleased and delighted to hear. This comes from John Charles. He writes in, there is mold within an interior wall on the first floor. This is confirmed by the smell and allergic response from anyone who gets too close. This is a very old house with several additions having been added every 75 years on average. Our homeowner's insurance incentivizes adding a water main monitoring device that will shut off the water to the main if there's a leak. It also tests for minor faults like dripping faucets, etc. For years, the device would warn that up to 5 gallons per day were leaking somewhere. I tried to find the leak but could not. My guess was that it was pertained to our elderly tenant leaving the faucet on, and there was little to be done about that. After all, if every day 5 gallons of water were leaking into the building, wouldn't it be apparent? Wouldn't we notice? We assumed so. Well, our tenant moved away. I shut off the water to that half of the building, and the water leak was still present. Now I was troubleshooting in earnest. We traced the leak to a 70-year-old toilet on the second floor. The tank was misaligned and dripping in such a way that the water disappeared into the wall, and then, I don't know, there were no water stains, nothing to indicate water damage. So when I shut off the water, was when the mold became noticeable. So the thing to do was break open the wall and have at it, and surely that time will come. But for now, I had a thought, a brilliant thought, a true stroke of genius. This idea has been vetoed by my wife, and I hope you will recognize who is right. My proposed solution is this. Get the mold remediation stuff from the home center, put it in the toilet tank that was leaking water, and use it to precisely deliver the treatment to the affected area. A mold remediation IV drip, if you will. Precise targeting with no need for demolition a week before Christmas. Thus, I asked 2 questions. 1, please tell my wife I'm brilliant. 2, what's the best stuff to denature mold spores that is suitable for application from a leaking toilet tank? For reasons of modesty, I wish to remain anonymous. Thanks in advance. Have a happy holiday and best wishes for the new year. Oh my gosh, guys, what do you think? The mold remediating IV drip. It's brilliant.
It is. It really is. Have you ever read a question like this and just knew that you could be friends with the person that wrote it?
Yes, absolutely. This is the kind of person, right? I don't think it's crazy, but I think, you can't be assured it's going to get everything, but I don't know if you need to. Andres, what do you think about this? You're familiar with tenants and property management, remediating weird things like similar, I'm sure. Have you had to deal with a slow leak that you couldn't track down?
Yeah, definitely. And the first thing the tenant does is call the health department. So in my experience, we'll be tearing up the wall and just getting rid of it altogether.
And is it the smell that alerts people, or do they find their wall is moldy? How's that work? How does it get discovered?
It's the smell, definitely. That's what everybody calls in for. There was one in particular that we couldn't find, and I remember it was being behind the wall because it was leaking from the bathtub. So it was leaking very slowly and troubling, and drywall kind of just sucks it up, and it was at a different section of the wall. So we tear up that section of the wall, but we couldn't find it. Little did we know that it was coming from the bathtub. So that was one of the cheekiest ones. And then the other ones that that had me really scratching my head was it was a condensate line from the HVAC unit, but from all the way up. So it was traveling down the wall from the exterior and coming down to like around the 5th floor or so. And we didn't know where it was coming from. So we thought it was the rain, but it wasn't. During the summertime, obviously, it got worse. So that's how we kind of trace it up that it was a clogged drain line from the condensate line.
And so do you have to check every unit along the pathway of that condensate line to eliminate the source of moisture?
For the condensate line, we actually came up with a PM plan, preventative maintenance. So every time we went into an apartment, every 6 months or so, we would inspect that section. And it's only because the HVAC unit is supposed to be level, so it would drain into the pan. Some of the units, because it's a commercial unit, were not labeled properly, so it was leaking from the bottom. So it was going the water instead of going to the drain, it was going back. It was overfilling and just going down the wall and into the apartments below. But it wouldn't affect the apartment just below, but the apartment all the way down. So that's why it was tricky. The other other issues that we found, it was just it gets clogged up. It was leveled properly, but it gets clogged up, and because there was no preventative maintenance in place back in the time, and it was just filled up, overflow, and just damage the drywall, damage the carpet, and that's when renters insurance came in and took care of that.
Condensate lines are a colossal pain for HVAC techs and clients because they do clog, and it's not a matter of if, it's when. How long does it take? And it could take years, so it's not even on your radar to maintain it.
Correct.
Am I right?
there's
Yeah.
small pans that kind of dissolve because it gets gooey. It's not just water just dripping or draining, but it actually gets gooey, and it tends to clog up, over the time. So there's actually some pans that you can just drop it there and it'll dissolve the water to just continue. But it's good to check every 3 months or 6 months or so.
I've talked to folks who are in the HVAC industry, and many commercial buildings have secondary condensate pans, assuming that the first one is eventually going to overflow or back up, and the second one is there to
Yeah,
prevent drywall from falling down and attic insulation from being saturated, because that could go on a long time before anyone noticed, and then when they notice, it's because the ceiling is now on the floor.
exactly.
Have you had to deal with tracking down these kind of leaks, Caleb?
Thankfully, not really. Yeah, I don't do a lot of plumbing. If I do, it'll be on a cabinet install or something, hooking up a sink, something simple like that. I'll install a toilet, but I'm not typically getting called to track down a 5 gallon per day leak like this,
What about,
thankfully,
I'm sure you've seen the evidence of exterior leaks rotting people's houses. Yeah. So,
for sure.
and do folks know that that's going on and just ignore it in your experience? Or is this something that is a complete surprise when you open a wall to do some other type of work?
I think sometimes both happen. We had one customer that had noticed that his carpet was wet from time to time, and he said, "Yeah, this has been going on for a while." I was like, "Well, what's a while?" He said, "Probably 15, 20 years." Oh my goodness. And you're just telling me now because I'm here to do something else for you. So I think there is some of both. When I used to work for my dad, the worst rot job I've ever seen my entire life. It was a second story or third story actually toilet that was leaking kind of like this, and it was going through the entire exterior backside of this lake house up on Sacandaga Lake in New York. And what was happening was it had open cell foam, and the water just soaked into the walls and it never left. And the people use it as a vacation home. They had no idea. So they noticed on the bottom story that there was like these little puddles on the concrete on their patio. And we were like, that's odd. So we started investigating, and literally 3 stories of 2x8 wall had to get replaced in a 16-foot section. It was insane. We had to tear out a 2-story deck. It was absolutely insane. So I think there's some of both. Sometimes people have no idea it's going on, and sometimes people just kind of ignore it because they don't want to deal with it.
The folks with the open cell foam, did they get tipped off because of a smell, like Andres was saying, or was there exterior rot? How did it show up?
No, literally, it was a small puddle on their patio, 3 stories down from the toilet, that they said they couldn't figure out why there is this puddle on their concrete patio. And they're like, we don't really care, but we don't understand why this puddle is just forming out of nowhere. And the deck above the patio had a drainage system in it. So they're like, there's no way that water could be coming from rain or anything like that. It was just this little puddle by the siding. And so we looked at it, and the rot just kept going up and up and up and up.
And I'm guessing that house, given the fact that it had, spray foam, wasn't that old. Was a recently built home?
Yeah, early 2000s. It was they bought it for right around $3 million, and absolutely beautiful house, beautiful property, but there were definitely some issues with it for sure.
How long did it take you guys to fix that rotted exterior wall?
We were there for a long time because in that the reason that we initially went up was because their basement flooded. So we did that at the same time as this job, and it was a couple months. It was going up to Sacandaga Lake every day. I mean, it was a beautiful view, and we got to do it during the summertime. So, we would work all day and then swim at night and fish and stuff. It was great, but big project. Yeah,
Did those people think they were cursed after all these water problems in their expensive home? I'm guessing they did. Yeah.
they did. Yeah, they were upset. I mean, great customers, but they, with every right, were upset that they had only owned the home for a few years and they're replacing the back half of the house. It's kind of a pain to deal with it.
I'm sure. So back to our mold remediation IV drip. Um, you know, Taking care of the mold is one thing, but rebuilding the house is something else, right? The mold cleaner is not going to fix the potentially rotted structure of this house. So I'm sure our listener understands that dealing with the mold and fixing the house are two different things. And yeah, it is brilliant though.
So obviously we're kind of, he said that he wanted to wait until after Christmas to dive into this. So it's a little late. But what I was thinking was, Patrick, have you ever heard of Decon 30?
No, but I'm intrigued.
So it's a botanical based mold and cleanser that the franchise, you've heard of Serve Pro. They
Yes.
do mold and fire remediation. So that is their sole cleaner, and it's completely non-toxic. It's a pretty awesome chemical. So I reached out to one of my friends that has a Serve Pro franchise in our area, and this is what he suggested for dealing with mold. So if you were going to fill up your toilet and dump 5 gallons of cleanser into your home, I would think that you'd want it to be something that was non-toxic. So this is the base ingredient. I think is oregano. Um, if I remember right, I think it's oregano. I could be wrong, but it smells great. It kind of makes your whatever you're cleaning smell like a pizza
Italian
restaurant or an
restaurant.
Italian restaurant. Yeah, and but it works incredibly. It works really well, and it's fairly inexpensive. Yeah,
Well, I think that's a great suggestion. And as you point out, putting 5 gallons of bleach, which is something folks might be tempted to dump into their walls, is probably a bad idea because it's going to stink forever for starters, and it is toxic, right? You wouldn't want that
yeah,
getting into the ground or what have you.
right.
Well, if y'all have thoughts on what to do about a slow leak that has created some damage, I hope you write into the podcast. And do send your gory photographs because that is also of interest to see what rotted, moldy construction looks like. So, Caleb, we're going to have you on the after show and talk about your first home. And you mentioned that it was a modular home. Is that a fair description? Yep.
Yep.
And you've done some improvements, and you sent some photographs to the podcast email box to show us what you've been doing. And it's been quite a dramatic transformation, and we're going to talk about that in the after show. Do you want to give folks a quick teaser of major projects that have occurred on the house that we're going to talk about?
We didn't we did it. My wife and I, we redid the house quickly right before we moved in. We basically had to get out of our old apartment and in here over the course of 30 days. And we wanted to do as many things as we possibly could in those 30 days. So we did new flooring, new trim, painted the kitchen cabinets, basically a quick fixer upper because this isn't going to be our forever home, but we wanted to be comfortable in it. And we've lived in construction so many times, we didn't want to do that. So we tried to do as much as possible in as little time as possible and called in some favors from friends and tried to get it comfortable and livable as quickly as possible. But
Well, one of the things I want to ask you more about is, how does a builder triage a house the way you describe and not get so consumed in making it perfect, which I think is a tendency of many folks who do trade work is to, want to make it as good as they possibly can. And I would say that it's A, expensive, and B, it ends up being the only thing you do. And that can be a source of burnout if you have to do it 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And then, or you're doing it for, 20, 16 hours on the weekend. So did you
Yeah.
feel like you had a good life balance while you were undertaking this? I'm guessing not.
Not,
I'm guessing it was consuming for a period.
yeah, not even remotely. Not even close.
Andres, do you have thoughts on stuff we're going to ask
Yeah, I want
Caleb?
to ask him about his air sealing process because I see he's doing new lighting in his ceilings. I want to ask to see how are you air sealing that, but that's gonna be answered in the after show.
And
People will have to
we
sign in.
should point out to folks who don't know it, you're a new homeowner too. So I think you guys will have a lot in common. Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, if you are a Fine Home Building All Access member, thank you very much for your support. And if you have after show ideas, I hope you send them into the podcast email box. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Caleb Carpenter and Andres Samaniego for being here with me. And thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building. Thanks very much for being here, Caleb.
Enjoyed it. Thanks. Anytime.